sorry, I think there's a glitch. Um, okay, I think I'm on IBM Developer. I think Mofi's on. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah, we'll just keep going on. I'm not sure what's going on with the Twitch stream. Oh, it
Okay.
is? Okay. Yeah.
All right. So Helen, you want to introduce yourself and we'll just do that over again?
Okay. Let me just, okay. Let me just go to the website as well. So there is a little bit of a lag. I'll just not pay attention to that and we can just keep going on. Yeah, so my name is Helen Lim and I'm a developer advocate at IBM. So I basically teach other software developers how to use some of our technologies. My focus is on the Watson APIs as well as some of the open source machine learning frameworks like TensorFlow that I'm pretty passionate about. And I've been working on some Kubernetes stuff lately as well. And yeah, so the focus of this session will be blockchain, but specifically around the theme of call for code. And I also want to introduce Oliver and Pedro, who are also developer advocates. So Oliver or Pedro?
My name is Oliver Rodriguez. I'm a developer advocate with IBM as well. And my specialty is really around blockchain. And so for today, I'll be taking you through, what is blockchain and what is Hyperledger Fabric, and show you kind of a sample smart contract and how we can deploy that to a local network. Pedro?
Awesome.
And so my name is Pedro Cruz. I'm a developer advocate as well. And today I'm going to be talking about how blockchain can be used for disaster relief. I'm a Hurricane Maria survivor. I'm born and raised in Puerto Rico. And I'm going to be talking about how blockchain can be used in our use cases and future natural disasters.
Awesome. Okay. And then also, Oliver, I guess we can discuss call for code. Just to introduce everyone. At the very end of the presentation, we'll show like the website and what is call for code and how do you submit an application if you're potentially interested. But call for code is a 5-year initiative that we started in 2018 that focuses on developing applications for a disaster relief situation, either before or after. And this year's sub-theme is focusing on community and health. And so how can we build applications that address some of the medical issues before disaster or after a disaster? I know with Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, which is a while ago, but there are certain waterborne illnesses, for example, that are very catastrophic after a hurricane. And that's not something we typically think about. Water that's been sitting there for several days actually has a severe impact on the types of illnesses that can waterborne illnesses that can run rampant. So initially, when I myself when I heard this theme, I wasn't sure how it would be, like what are different use cases that would be applicable. But at the very end, I'll walk through the website and show you a few examples of different ideas that people are thinking about and that IBM has also come up with in partnership with the Red Cross and United Nations, as well as the Clinton Foundation for Universities. So various universities and colleges that we're also working with on the Call for Code initiative. But yeah, and we'll learn a lot more throughout this session as Pedro talks about different use cases with blockchain and Oliver goes into what is Hyperledger blockchain, and then what are some applications you could apply for Call for Code. So yeah, so Oliver, can you tell us more about Hyperledger and private versus public blockchain? Because these are a lot of fundamental questions that everyone has when they first start to get interested in blockchain.
Yeah, absolutely. And blockchain, it's a fantastic technology, but it's kind of complicated. There's a lot to learn about it. So hopefully this presentation will at least introduce you to the concept of blockchain and some of the aspects of the technology and how we can use it. So as Helen said, Call for Code is your chance to really, build something to make a difference, to help people out. So hopefully you can build something and get involved. So with that being said, let's go into this presentation so we can learn more about blockchain. So what is blockchain? That's a very big question. It's a lot of things. So first off, blockchain is a buzzword. And I always like to start off with this tweet because it kind of summarizes the perception of blockchain in the startup community. So how to get funding. Keep saying blockchain really fast until people in suits get confused and throw money at you. So basically, blockchain is kind of the hot topic right now. If you say blockchain, people are interested automatically. But joking around, blockchain is a very important technology, but you just have to find the right use cases for it. So the short answer of what is blockchain? So blockchain is technology that allows for a group of participants to share a distributed ledger in which updates are propagated to all participants. So essentially, everybody in this network has their own ledger, and the ledgers have all the same information. And whenever somebody makes an update to one ledger, that is basically sent over to all the other ledgers. So everybody has that same data. So everybody's on the same page. So sounds easy, right? Well, here's a little longer answer. So blockchain, it's an immutable chain of blocks that contain transactions that have been submitted on the network. So you have these blocks of transactions that can't be modified or changed. So it's kind of that concrete history of what went on in that business network. So you always know where something has been. If you need to trace an asset or supplies, for example, that are going towards a disaster area, you want blockchain to have that paper trail essentially. And in order to keep everybody on the same page, you have what are called consensus mechanisms that make sure everybody gets the correct data and that it's in the correct order. Because if you have the correct data, but it's not in the right order, then it's useless data. It needs to be in the correct order as well.
So, sorry, quick question. And I'm just asking because it's just something that came to mind. But yeah. Let's say in the event of using blockchain for payments in Call for Code. Sorry, Pedro, to burst your bubble, but to use your example, it's the one that I can think about. But if you have all these donations that are coming in, right? Mm-hmm. And most recently, Notre Dame, in Paris, it's not really a natural disaster, but they had a lot of money, flow in to rebuild and restore Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. So in order to increase transparency of these funds, when you mean the correct order, so let's say, I donated $100 and then Pedro behind me donated $200 tomorrow. Is mm-hmm. that what you mean by the correct order, or? More
of that, you can't spend the money unless the money comes in first. So say, for example, okay. You donate $100 and Pedro donates $100, and then the charity wants to spend $200 on something. Well, okay. In order to spend the $200, you need to wait for both of those, donations to go in first before you can spend the $200. Does that make sense?
Right. So it's almost like in the event of like a payment, which is typically when you think of blockchain in finance, that's like one of the first use cases. So when you say an order, it's just it's almost like closing that first transaction before you can get to the second step.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I want to ask you more questions.
No, it was a good question. Good question.
Yeah.
So yeah, back to the longer answer of what is blockchain. So past transactions, they can't be modified. So it's an append-only system, and that's by design because you want this concrete trail of transactions. You don't want someone to be able to go back and change something that happened in the past. So it's an append-only system, meaning that you can only add additional blocks to the end. You can't go back and change anything else, and that makes it so that you can trust what's in there. You can trust that it has been modified and that data is as it should be, as it was transacted on the network. So another way I like to put this is blockchain is like writing with a pen. And this is a quote from a guy named Nigel Gopi in an article he wrote called Two Truths and a Lie, the newest party game to explain blockchain. And in that article, he really goes through some easy ways to explain blockchain. And this quote right here really stood out to me, because it kind of makes sense. So blockchain is like writing with a pen. So imagine you're taking notes with a pen and you make a mistake and you don't have any whiteout or anything on you. What do? You go back to the mistake, you strike through it, and you make a correction over it, right? So anybody that happens to go looking through your notes, they can see that there was a mistake, that it was crossed out, and that there's a correction above that. So blockchain kind of has the similar concept. You don't go back and change mistakes. You instead add a correcting entry at the end to, fix whatever it is you wanted to fix. So similar concepts. And so it's not enough to just talk about blockchain, but we need to talk about blockchain in the scope of businesses or organizations or charities interacting with each other, because these businesses and organizations have specific needs in their use cases that that blockchain can address. So if we're talking about just standard businesses, we have these terms that come to mind, such as business networks, which are just organizations that are working together. So it could be charities, government organizations. They're just working together, transacting somehow. And then these participants in the network, they have identities. So they have names of these organizations. Those organizations, they have people under them, and those people have different roles and jobs assigned to them. And so we need a implementation that kind of takes that into hand, this structure of identities. And these business networks, they have these assets that go from person to person. So we're keeping track of items. So whether it be supplies or donations, you need a system that kind of keeps track of all of that. And these transactions that are actually moving the assets, they have to be clearly defined. And typically they're written in a contract somewhere that both businesses can look at, and they can see this transaction or this sale costs this amount of dollars, or we're going to be giving this participant these resources. So those clearly defined transactions are defined in a contract somewhere. And then of course, every participant has a ledger that they can see the history of the transaction, so they can see what supplies went where and who has which supplies currently, and so on. And so when we start talking about these requirements for businesses and how businesses are structured, we need to see which implementation of blockchain really fits with that. And so there's two kind of general categories of blockchain implementations that I like to separate here. And this is where we start talking about the differences between public blockchains and private blockchains. So you may have heard of Bitcoin before. That's kind of the example that I'm going to be using for the public blockchain implementation. It's kind of the most famous one that most people have already heard of. And on the private side, I'm going to be talking about Hyperledger Fabric, and I'll be discussing the differences between the two and why one makes more sense for business rather than the other. So when we start talking about identities, Bitcoin by design is pseudo-anonymous. So you have an address for the wallet, but you don't really know who's behind that. You don't have an identity that kind of matches that address to a person or organization. But with Hyperledger Fabric, you have known identities. You know exactly who you're transacting with. You know they're an organization and they have members underneath that organization. So Hyperledger Fabric allows for that organization.
Sorry to interrupt, Oliver. We have a question in the stream.
Yeah.
And I know we have a full hour, so there's a guy, Ken16310, who has a question. So in case he drops, I just wanted to get his answer. Okay. So both to you or even Pedro, if he has any input. But Hyperledger has the native token. What makes proof? So
What makes proof?
Yeah, Hyperledger has the native token, and what makes proof? I don't know if he's referring to crypto.
If they're referring to the consensus mechanism, like proof of work for Bitcoin. I'll be getting to that here soon, but Hyperledger Fabric doesn't really have a strict consensus mechanism like that. There's no proof of work or proof of stake or even proof of time elapsed. They have a different consensus mechanism that kind of relies on selective endorsement. So you get to choose on the network who approves the transactions, and then it's ordered from there on, and it's a different process. Right. But there's more information in the documentation. They have a really good diagram that shows you the three-step process of consensus mechanism for Hyperledger Fabric, and it's a really, really interesting read.
Okay, awesome.
I'll be touching on that here in a bit.
Later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Bitcoin, it's cryptocurrency based, of course. It's for trading this Bitcoin currency. Whereas
Right.
Hyperledger Fabric, we have a focus on assets as opposed to cryptocurrency. So if you're trading supplies, if you're tracking, water shipments, or even
Cargo. Yeah.
manage cargo shipments, things like that. Those assets, or even intangible assets like bonds or commercial papers, that can be tracked with Hyperledger Fabric, and that's kind of really what Hyperledger Fabric was designed for. And so this is kind of where we talk about consensus mechanisms. So Bitcoin, the consensus mechanism is proof of work. So it takes a lot of time and energy to actually mine the blocks that go into the blockchain for Bitcoin.
Right.
And it's very resource intensive. But in Hyperledger Fabric, you have a known set of participants you're interacting with. These are other people you're in business with. And there's at least some level of trust with who you're interacting with.
Right.
So the consensus mechanism doesn't have to be as strict. So essentially what you do with Hyperledger Fabric is you define who is going to endorse the transaction. So who's going to run the transaction and sign off on it. And then after everybody signs off on it, it's sent to a node called the ordering node, which orders the transactions in whatever order that they're received in. And then once they're in that order, they're packaged into a block, and that block is then sent to the committing peers. So it's that three-step process of endorsement, ordering, and then committing, and validation / committing. And that's the documentation goes into more detail on how that happens, but it's less resource intensive than public blockchain implementations. So it's faster, you get more throughput as well.
Right. Also, sorry, just wanted, I see the comments from Suman Saha, and he said, he or she said that they would like to see the end-to-end application process of blockchain. So that's the second part of Oliver's discussion, where he's going to demo an example, and we'll link, I'll actually link it right now. I'm just trying to sign into Twitch, so I can't comment. I was trying to respond. Yeah, so we'll get to that. Sorry to disrupt your flow, Oliver. Go on.
No, it's all good.
Yeah.
All right. And so when we start talking about who can view what transactions, in a public implementation like Bitcoin, by design, these transactions are viewable by everybody. So everybody can see, what transactions have occurred. However, Hyperledger Fabric, this is where the private, the name private blockchain comes in, where these transactions, they can be kept private between members. And the reason that is because, say for example, you're in a network with you have two suppliers and maybe they're competitors with each other. You might not want one supplier to know what you pay for one item that the other supplier is also selling. So having that separation allows for you to keep some information confidential, but at the same time, everybody that's involved in that process, so who you're selling to, who you're buying from, they will be able to see the blockchain. So it's private in some sense, but there's still that transparency of what went on in the transaction. So you kind of get to design that privacy on however you choose.
Right. And I think that's so imperative because, for example, anyone that knows about economies of scale, right? So if you go to like Costco and you buy in bulk, you're obviously going to get a different price than if you buy just like one Red Bull versus like 50. So, one of the big criticisms of, I'm not like a huge crypto person, but I do read a lot online and was going to buy some Bitcoin myself. But one of the huge criticisms of like the private blockchain is like, oh, it's, not the original ethos of the original blockchain. But in the real world, in a business use case, obviously as a producer of, some sort of product like Red Bull Heaven Lamb version, right? I can't give the same price to someone who's buying one versus someone who's buying, 2,000, because that's I wouldn't make any money if I sold the one product for the same as the buying in bulk, which is, the basic principle or, of economies of scale, right? So, yeah. So I'm not going to go into economics 101, but Google that, economies of scale, guys. All right.
Yeah. No, you bring up a really good point though about how some people say that private blockchains might, it's not the true blockchain point of view, but I don't think there should be one blockchain point of view. There's different use cases which require different implementations. So in some cases, private blockchains make sense. In some cases, public blockchains make sense. There's no right answer of, one is better than the other. It depends. That's the answer.
I think it depends on the business use case. And oftentimes, like my parents own a small business, but maybe I just see things from a business perspective, and it's, and just, yeah, exactly. Within different contexts, maybe, a private blockchain would be better in a business context, but a public blockchain for other sorts of payments would be like having 100% transparency would be ideal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So again, more on privacy. Public blockchains are open to everybody. I mean, anybody can transact on it, whether with private blockchains like Hyperledger Fabric. You actually got to be invited to the network. So that exclusivity is, additional security as well to everybody else on the network.
Right.
So yeah, that was kind of the comparison between the two. But what is Hyperledger though? I mean, we mentioned it by name, but we didn't really dive into it. So Hyperledger, Linux Foundation Hyperledger is just a collaborative effort where a bunch of different companies came together to just create different blockchain technologies. And so the one we're going to be focusing on today is Hyperledger Fabric. And as I mentioned before, Hyperledger Fabric, it's a private permission blockchain. So you can actually give permissions based on the organization and the user roles under those organizations. Everybody has that shared ledger, of course. And we have this notion of smart contracts, which define all the transaction logic for your network. And those contracts are packaged as chain code and deployed on the network. And I'll be going through that process during the demo. And what makes Hyperledger Fabric great for businesses and organizations is that it's modular and allows for flexible hosting options so that you can really customize your network based on your use case. So if you need a big network with tons of scaling, you can do that. Or if you need just a smaller network, for smaller use cases, you can design your network as you choose. And I took this picture from the Hyperledger Fabric or Hyperledger website because it has a pretty cool visual of all the different frameworks and the tools available. So Hyperledger Fabric is, I said, what we're going to be talking about today, but there are other implementations that have their own specialties as well. And they're pretty cool.
Right.
So just real quick, before we go into the demo, I wanted to show what the ledger looks like, because we'll be interacting with the ledger when we build our smart contract, and you kind of need to know what it is you're interacting with. So when we talk about the ledger, there are two parts in the Hyperledger Fabric ledger. There's the world state, and then there's the blockchain itself. So we've been talking about this chain of immutable blocks, right? That's what the blockchain is. It's that chain of immutable blocks which have the transactions and the inputs and outputs of those transactions. All of that's kept in the blockchain. The world state, however, is the latest state of the asset. So say, for example, you have a shipment that you're keeping track of. You might have the current location of that shipment. So it could be currently being held by the shipping company going across the sea. So that data would be stored in the world state. So you'd have the shipment object, and you'd have a property saying, current owner, shipping company. Once that shipment reaches the shore and it gets transferred over to the trucking company, that property might change. Current owner will change to, trucking company. And that latest up-to-date information will be stored in the world state. And the reason I bring that up is because the world state, it's not immutable. The blockchain is, but the world state isn't, because you need to keep changing the properties of those assets in the world state. If you're keeping track of the current location, that's constantly changing. So you're changing that property in the world state. So you need to understand that the blockchain itself is immutable. The world state can change. And we'll be making those changes in our application or in our smart contracts. So just a quick overview of where the smart contract fits in this Hyperledger Fabric architecture. So you, as the blockchain developer, you have two things to develop. You have your client application and your smart contract. The smart contract, as we said, just defines all the transactions that are going to be invoked on your network, and that sits inside your blockchain network, and that interacts with the ledger directly. The client application, however, sits outside the network. That's your regular end user application, and that submits transaction proposals to be invoked on the smart contract. And so that's what end users interact with, just that client application, which then interacts with the smart contract. And the smart contract is what actually defines what changes in the world state. So whether you add new objects, delete new objects, or delete objects, or modify existing objects, that's going to be handled by the smart contract. And anything that does happen is going to automatically be recorded to the blockchain. So that's just kind of a high-level view of how this all fits together. Again, it's just a quick run through of blockchain and Hyperledger Fabric. There's still a ton more to dive into, but I recommend checking out the documentation if you want to go into further detail. Right now, I'm going to dive into our demo real quick and show you how we can actually build and deploy a smart contract. All right.
Oliver, when we're done that, could we just go to the, or could we post the link for the documentation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. And then I'll just write that in the comments. Oh, okay. You meant just the official documentation.
Yeah, it's the official documentation, but it's the best place to go for. Oh, not that one.
Yeah, so it's updated quite frequently, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, it's updated a lot whenever there's a new release. But yeah, so this link, I don't know if I can post in the chat right now, but Helen, if you can
I'll post it, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, great place to go. The architecture reference is packed full of information on how the network actually works, and it touches on the consensus mechanism as well. So architecture reference and key concepts if you want to learn more about how the network actually functions. All right, so onto the demo. I'm going to be doing an example from our IBM developer page. So if you've never been to IBM developer, this is where we have all of our tutorial content and hands-on material. Great place for actually getting your hands on code. So this is at developer.ibm.com. And so I'll be going to the blockchain section. And within the blockchain section and all the other technologies, we have what are called code patterns. And these are solutions that are packaged up into very quick modules that you can run like in an hour, or 30 minutes or an hour, however long it takes, but really quick, just end-to-end solutions that you can build out. So on the left side, I'm going to click on code patterns, and you have all of these that are available. So I'm going to start off with a simple one since it's kind of our first foray into blockchain and smart contracts. So this one that was released on April 16th, create and execute blockchain smart contract. I'm not going to walk through all this entirely, but I'll be showing you kind of what the pattern entails. So if you click on get the code, it'll take you to GitHub, where you get the README and you can run through the lab steps. So if you follow the instructions, they're going to have you clone this locally and open up the smart contract. So this contract is written in Node.js, which is kind of my language of specialty. You can also do contracts in Golang or even Java now, I believe. So adding some additional languages. But since I'm comfortable with Node.js, it's just kind of what I stuck with. So I'm not going to go through line by line of this code, so I'm not going to put you all to sleep here. But I'm going to cover the high points and kind of show you what the transactions look like. So we have this NPM module, Fabric Contract API. This is where we will be pulling in our contract class that we'll be extending here on line 16. So we create the class of auction, and then we have our transactions under that. So each function here is a transaction that we can invoke if needed. So it's the instantiate function is just called whenever you instantiate the contract on the network for the first time, and in this case, it just outputs something to the log. Contract is instantiating. The second function just sets up the demo. It adds 2 different commodities and 2 different traders. I guess I should go over the use case for this pattern, but essentially it's a very simple trading application. You have people just trading commodities, and that commodity can be anything. In this case, it's gold and a pharmaceutical drug of some kind. So yeah, this setup transaction just creates 2 commodities and then 2 traders to trade those commodities between each other. So very simple. And if you want to take a look at how you actually interact with the ledger, all these 08 CTX stub lines here, these are how you actually interact with the ledger. So the stub interface interacts with the world state, and we're going to be putting state. So this is putting in a brand new object into the world states. We're giving it the key and then the object, and we're doing that for each one of these new objects. And the documentation for this pattern goes through exactly what each line is doing. So if you want to learn more in depth about what's going on, check out the README for this code pattern. And then the next function here, check quantity, just sees how much of that commodity is there and just returns that back. Very easy. And the last one, of course, trades one commodity to the other person. So super easy. There's really only one useful function in here, which is trading from person to person. The others are just kind of there as helper functions. So very simple use case, and it's what we'll be doing today. So great, we have a smart contract. How do we actually use this? So if you use VS Code, Visual Studio Code, there's this really handy plugin called the IBM Blockchain Platform extension for VS Code. And if you actually just go to the extensions tab and just search for blockchain, you can find it. And this helps you create your own smart contracts and actually helps you create a local blockchain network. So you can develop and test locally. It's very handy, very easy to use. And let me show you how to actually use it. So once you install it, you'll get this handy little icon on the left. When you first start it up, there's not going to be any entry here. You just click the line here that says Start Network, and it'll bring up a local network for you with the click of a button. So really easy to use. So this is an empty network. There's nothing on here, no smart contracts installed. So let's go ahead and do that. The first step is actually going to be packaging the smart contract. So we have the contract written up. We just need to package it into a format that the network will understand. So we package it up. It's now auction at 001. That's our version number. Let's go ahead and install that. So the first step is to install the smart contract. There, now you installed it, it's on the network. Now we have to actually start the application, start the smart contract. And so we do that by instantiating the smart contract.
So just to be sure, because we have I think a few people really interested in building, their own Hyperledger, application. But so this is the VS Code plugin,
right?
Using Hyperledger. Okay.
Yes.
So okay. So meaning that if you were to start from scratch, would you still have to have the local version of Hyperledger, or it's already encapsulated within the VS Code plugin?
If you wanted to start your own smart contract from scratch, or your own blockchain network from scratch.
Your own, let's say if you just want to build a very simple Hyperledger blockchain application just for fun, like 101.
Right.
Yeah, you would just need VS Code and then have Hyperledger running locally as well.
Yeah, so yeah, you need VS Code, you need Docker, and I believe Node.js, a specific version of Node.js, and then the plugin will handle the creation of the network behind the scenes for you. So it does all that work for you.
Perfect.
And then if you want to start from scratch, there's a function up here at the top under smart contracts. You can click on the 3 buttons and then create a smart contract project. And that'll give you like a template application that you can just fill in the blanks for and modify as you need. So very easy to get started just from scratch as well with the template.
Okay, and then you also have to download VS Code.
Yeah.
Visual Studio. Yeah. Okay.
VS Code, the plugin, Docker, and Node.js. That's pretty much all you need.
Right.
All right. So we, let me start over. So we got to instantiate now. And this essentially is just starting the container that's running your smart contracts. It's asking for a function. So we're going to give it the instantiate function, no arguments. No private data. And so now it's just going to spin up that contract for us and have it running in a container. And so that's going to instantiate. It's going to, if you can see the output, what it's doing is it's running an npm install, getting all the dependencies, and just treating it like any other Node.js application. And so that's going to take a minute to do. But while that's happening, I went ahead and, okay, it's already done. So I might as well just show you now. So it's installed, it's instantiated, it's currently running. So now we can interact with the smart contract and instantiate it. So this plugin also has this function where we can actually test out these transactions. So what we're going to do is in this Fabric Gateway section, we can click on Local Fabric. If you check under your channel, you have the instantiated smart contract, and you can see all the transactions here that were defined in our smart contract. So since we want to set up our demo, we can call this function, the creates assets function. So right now our world state is empty. Let's go ahead and populate it with some information. So if we right click on the transaction, we can hit submit transaction. Doesn't require any arguments or additional data. And so it's going to go ahead and it created all the assets for us. So just to make sure that it was all created, we have this other function called check quantity. We can just go ahead and submit transaction, and it's going to ask for what commodity we want to actually check the quantity for. So let's check our gold commodity.
So sorry, Oliver. So you updated the world state, which basically means what's the status, like what's the latest transaction, and we don't have any, so we submitted one. And then your second step was check quantity.
Yeah, so we basically filled up the world state with data. Now we're just seeing, what's in there. And so if you see the last output here, return value from check quantity 100. So we have data in our world state essentially. So it's really easy to do. That was just a quick demo of how that's actually done locally. If you continue on with the pattern, there's additional steps such as trading between each participant. But due to time, I'm just going to move on to something else, something extra I wanted to show you. So this is the network running locally, but what if you want to run it in the cloud so other participants can join your network? Well, that's what the IBM blockchain platform is for. So this, I ran this same smart contract here in the cloud. You can see these are the different components of my network, my peers, certificate authorities, orderers. So all this components of my network, they're all running in the cloud. I can go to smart contracts and I can see, I would be able to see that my contracts are there and they're running. And I can also show you that you can actually, okay, there's the contracts. You can actually see the actual blockchain and the different blocks in your blockchain. So I went to the channel that I'm on. You can see the different blocks. You can actually go into each block and see what the transactions are that were included in that block. So I ran this one earlier today. And in this case, you can see check quantity. I ran that same transaction against my cloud network. So this cloud platform allows you to really have this network that anybody can connect to. So you can build your own network with your own participants and really see what transactions have been submitted and have that transparency for each transaction. So there's a ton you can do with here. Those patterns really walk you through how to use this and how it could be useful.
Sorry, Oliver, can we just show everyone the code patterns page?
Yeah.
And then also to be clear, the IBM blockchain platform is a version of Hyperledger, the same version, but not running the latest Hyperledger Fabric version, just because, the latest, can sometimes occasionally have flaws we need to work on. That's not specific to Hyperledger. That's just like any release, right?
Right. So yeah, essentially it's running Hyperledger Fabric in the cloud. I think that version is 1.4.
Right.
And the local version is 1.4.1. So almost the same version, same major and minor versions. But yeah, it's running in the cloud. It's same smart contract, same basic network, but it's publicly accessible. So I can invite anybody I want to that network.
And also the cloud-based version is for typically like companies that are implementing Hyperledger if they don't want to deal with the updates and just all of the in the weeds kind of work that you have to do. But
Right.
it's open source, so you can still run Hyperledger outside of, you don't have to have it hosted on the cloud. So there's like two options, right?
Exactly.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear for everyone.
Yeah, and it is in free beta right now. So if you want to check it out for free, you can play with it for 30 days for free just to check it out and see how easy it is to build the networks. So this is the pattern page again for blockchain. The one that I quickly went through was this create and execute a blockchain smart contract. But there are some really cool, interesting ones that are more involved. Like building, facilitating collaboration between non-governmental organizations using blockchain, regulating food shipments. Really cool samples. If you want to extend these for your call for code solutions, there's a ton you can build off of.
So I, in the interest of the time, we started a few minutes late, so hopefully we can go over the hour by a few minutes. But we did have some questions from some seemingly savvy blockchain people. So by their type of questions, I'm like, okay, these guys or girls know what they're talking about. Okay, so here's one from Ken, which basically said, ask what's the difference between a MySQL database, so it doesn't have to be MySQL, but any relational database, and Hyperledger. And I know, Pedro, you've worked a bit with Ethereum as well. So what are your answers to this question? And I've read up on this topic, but obviously, Oliver, a little bit more than I do about blockchain. So you or Pedro want to?
Yeah, that's a good question. So
it's a common one too.
It is a very common one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the MySQL database is a relational database. You have tables, right? Hyperledger Fabric this version that I'm using is based on CouchDB, which is a NoSQL database, which means it stores documents rather than like having tables and having to join tables. You have different it's a lot less structured. It's an unstructured a database. It's just storing documents rather than storing entries in tables. I'm not doing a great job of explaining it.
It's okay. Everyone Google CouchDB.
It's based on CouchDB.
We'd be here for another 30 minutes if we had to explain CouchDB. But it's not a relational database and it stores documents. Right. Okay. So
NoSQL versus relational. That's all you got to know. All right. So
I think also for me, like the governance surrounding blockchain, like 3 shipping companies, for example, that decide to use Hyperledger. Like in terms of from like a technical perspective, obviously like a database, everyone contributes like some sort of, document in the CouchDB case, right? But, CouchDB in and of itself would not be able to perform, the private, transactions, and then also certain transactions that are completely public within Hyperledger. Like there's still like a governance framework around it, even if it's theoretical. So that's my opinion. But yeah, just on reading it. What do you guys think in terms of, Pedro, what are your thoughts on that? Like just like 30-second answer. I'm just curious.
Yeah. So I like to summarize it as blockchain is like a linked list over a glorified linked list. So the transactions will all be recorded and refer back to each other. So with MySQL, that's a relational database. But in this case, Hyperledger is like a linked list. That's how I like to explain it.
In this case, Hyperledger is what?
It's like a linked list.
Oh, it's like a linked list.
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
Right. And if you were to create a linked list on your own, as long I think the fundamental like core of it sounds so simple, like, oh, it's just a database. Oh, it's just a linked list. Like you can just write in the command line and create like a linked list. Yeah. But, obviously there's like a lot more to the application that you have to build out in terms of scalability, in terms of if I have a shipping company and you two have a shipping company and we want to create like a private blockchain together, you know, it's a lot more than just a simple database or a linked list in terms of building out an entire application. And so I have one other question. I'm just looking through this thread from Tank909. Sorry, Oliver, do you want to keep, is that it in terms of your presentation?
Yep, I wrapped it up. It was just a quick demo of the smart contract. We're running short on time, so I kind of cut off the last transaction, but as I said, the pattern shows you all, everything you need to do and the rest of the transactions. So yeah, and I'll pass it on to Pedro.
Oh, okay. Sorry. One more question. And Pedro, we will give me just 1 minute. So any built-in security tools for re-entry?
Built-in security tools for re-entry.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure what they mean by re-entry, but I feel like it could be when you're submitting a transaction.
Like overriding the transaction, is that what they mean?
I think so. Yeah.
And overrunning the transaction. I still don't follow.
Of a transaction.
Yeah, you know what? I think it was just one of those questions where, like the person asking understands the context, but we need a little more detail. And then he also wrote and advantages over a DHT. So, okay, I think this is, I don't know what.
I can follow that one up in the chat, maybe. I just got to look into that.
Okay.
But if Pedro, if you want to go ahead and start, you can go ahead and.
Yeah, let's, so Oliver, we can just proceed in the chat. But yeah, we're getting a lot of, oh, okay, Tank said as in forced contract executions. Okay, so we'll move on just because we only have 10 minutes left. And then Oliver, the people in the comment section have like a few questions. But yeah, so Pedro, so this is my colleague. He's also a developer advocate at IBM. He's based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So are you currently at Engine 4?
Right now I'm in a co-working space in Santurce.
Okay, cool. He gets to work from all the cool offices in San Juan. And we actually met last year, and he participated in the first year of Call for Code after the hurricane there. We had a hackathon based off Call for Code in San Juan at Engine 4. And now he's actually joined IBM and works on my team. He's a really savvy developer, focusing on a lot of virtual reality applications. And he's also a part of the Ethereum meetup scene and community in Puerto Rico. And so actually at the hackathon, he won. I'm not sure if you were number one, were you? Or number 2 or 3? Or it doesn't matter.
So Puerto Rico hackathon, I created a drone application. It's called DroneAid. And basically looks for SOS messages after a hurricane or after a natural disaster. So I can explain a little bit more about my story now.
Okay, yeah, sure. So basically, Pedro will go into details of Call for Code and then some of the blockchain use cases for building an application to help out during disaster relief situation. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Helen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so here's my story. I am born and raised in Puerto Rico, and I've passed through over 5 different hurricanes since I've been alive. And this one, Hurricane Maria, I did not expect it. I did not prepare. I thought it was going to be like others where it was just going to pass. So I did not get gas. I didn't really prepare enough to get food and water. So the hurricane passed, and around 5 p.m., I they had no electricity, no telecommunications, nothing. So I ventured off to look for my family. And this is kind of how the road looked like. Not as exaggerated in certain areas, but this is an excellent picture on how the island looked like. There were telephone poles down, electricity was down, and it was a huge challenge for transportation in general. So that was one of the problems. Trying to clear out the roads was the first 2 weeks of response. Afterwards, once the roads were clear, people started to venture out to look for food, supplies, and obviously as well look for cash. Since there was no internet, communications, and barely any electricity, we had to use cash basically for all of the transactions. What happened was that banks ran out of cash. And this was one of the biggest challenges for all citizens of Puerto Rico and as well as the government. So then afterwards, as supplies started coming into the island, we had thousands of people donating to the island with water, with food, medical supplies. And one of the challenges was to track them. Since we don't have any computer systems and we're all doing everything by hand in many cases, NGOs, nonprofits, the government really had a huge challenge on tracking the donations. So this is where I believe blockchain can help. In the case for a natural disaster like Hurricane Maria, it could be used to track donations all the way from the donator to the person receiving it. So here's an example of a code pattern that you can look for on the code pattern page on the IBM website. Basically, it's a use case to be able to track the donations. So over here on the left, we have the Hyperledger Composer Playground. And then the network consists of really two main entities, the government, the aid organization, and as well as the citizen who makes a donation. So with this type of network, you'll be able to see how the transactions are being emitted, where the donations are going, but as well as being able to track not only monetary donations, but assets and medical supplies. So if you're interested in more information about Call for Code, I really encourage you to check out the Call for Code website. It has impacted, natural disasters have impacted over 2.5 billion people, and they're only getting stronger. So right now, my mission is really to help out developers, find those use cases, find those problems where we could use technologies like blockchain. So if you're interested more about Call for Code, you can actually go to the website or even reach out to us for more information.
I feel like we should post all of our Twitter handles too. Yeah, I'll write them down on a document and share. So wow, you finished really quickly, Pedro. I wasn't expecting that. Yeah. So basically, you think that, using blockchain in the event of receiving payments after a hurricane or another natural disaster, in order to rebuild the city and the country, and then also things like the water bottles, it's still there right now in Puerto Rico. Literally, I think there's not 1 million, but I feel like there's like 500,000 water bottles there.
Yeah, probably even more.
Yeah.
So yeah, actually, I can give another use case. Apart from tracking donations, there's also insurance. So one of the main challenges was for citizens was receiving their insurance claims as well as businesses. It takes a long time, and insurance companies on the island, they were struggling without electricity. So imagine a world where we could have the insurance tracked with a blockchain. We can have an insurance network where when a hurricane is detected based on wind speeds using IoT devices around the city with sensors, it could automatically deposit the insurance based on that. as well as banking. There could be another use case where we have an organization who acts as donations for supplies and for cash. And if there's no electricity, how could we have that network flowing? So we could have the local network with a backup generator, and everyone could receive like a code, and they could go to that organization, receive their donation, and confirm their identity with the code. So another use case is really making sure identity is private, and that's another use case as well for blockchain and Hyperledger.
Awesome. So someone had a question that's pretty interesting. Can you talk more about the medical equipment use cases, or even, I guess, medicine?
Yeah, definitely. So this comes from the heart. My grandma, for example, she had huge struggle trying to get medicine. And this problem was all over around the island, where hospitals, they were running on backup generators, but the diesel really, the transportation, the gas, they couldn't be delivered. So with medicine, being able to track those, for example, insulin, making sure it's also cool, could also be a use case. So for example, let's just say we have an organization like the Red Cross or another big NGO who's going to be sending insulin and medical supplies to Puerto Rico or a place that was affected by a natural disaster. They want to make sure that insulin is cool, and it's always, it could be a certain temperature. So imagine a box where it's confirmed by the blockchain that temperature was always consistent. So that's also another use case for medicine.
Awesome. So Maya, who's someone at IBM who's working on the back end of this, said that we could go over a little bit. And I hate to put you on the spot again, Oliver, but these are really great questions and questions that I would ask myself. So I did want to go over a few of them. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to answer as best as I can, but don't really know too much about these distributed hash tables.
So can we use MongoDB instead of CouchDB or Hyperledger?
Not at the moment. Only LevelDB and CouchDB are supported.
Okay, so LevelDB and CouchDB. There's your answer. Okay. And then we have another one. These are very technical questions. Okay, so I guess we tried to answer Ken's question, but any benefits using blockchain over traditional databases?
Or traditional databases. So it really depends. But with blockchains, you have the element of trust that's built into the network itself, and that's kind of the main one that I like to bring up. You have the consensus mechanism to really make sure everything is as it should be.
So your answer is primarily, I guess if someone had to Google this after this, it would be look up consensus mechanism, Hyperledger, Google that, and then, yeah.
More or less, yeah.
Okay. No, I don't mean that's a bad answer. I'm trying to make it so that we can give sort of like, takeaway or like main keywords to look up that will help answer their questions, because obviously the topic of consensus would be another hour.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of interest, and quite a few people are asking if we could, walk through not just the demo, but like creating the application. And so what I told them was that we would have like more of a deep dive blockchain, and we would post it on the Twitch agenda ahead of time so that they know what day. And then also because it's being recorded on Twitch and YouTube, even if they miss it, they could watch it later on. Well, obviously, if you're live, you're able to participate and ask questions. And so I think I saw one more question, one or two. It really sucks that the Twitch stream on the right doesn't, it's not like a sticky session. So if you refresh it, you can't see the questions. So I'm not refreshing this browser, but okay, so one other question. Okay, so the Tank 909, when he said the question about security reentry, what he meant was forced contract execution. So someone coming in and adding to the blockchain, or just, you know, either adding or executing like a payment, for example, which is a pretty good question. So what are sort of the security features around that?
I'm still not entirely sure what the forced contract execution is.
So I think I could be wrong, but I think it would mean like, let's say in the Hyperledger application, like you are making a payment for $100 to, I don't know, a donation. I'm like literally flying by my pants talking right now. Okay, so then hypothetically, if someone, you know, were to go in and make like a bogus nonprofit, like, you know, Hurricane blah 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 nonprofit, and then I guess they could take that payment to, you know, within the 10 nonprofits that they could donate to, make it, I guess, a payment to theirs. So for example, like
So
just someone, like someone from outside, I guess, like forcing a payment to go to a certain third party, or just like someone that doesn't belong there, like enforcing a payment or contributing to the ledger.
Okay, so let's go back. So you said an outsider or someone pretending to be somebody else interacting with the network.
Right.
In that case, it's up to how you decide on who you want to interact with the network. There's got to be that element in place of who you invite. So it's going to be kind of the human element of deciding who you want to be a part of your network and verifying those credentials. That's going to kind of be on the operator themselves to make sure those are the valid entities.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and as opposed to, never mind. That is pretty much it. It's going to be up to deciding who's going to be on the network.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So a few people. Yeah. Some people are commenting. They have like more comments rather than questions. So I think this is pretty much it. What else? Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Someone is answering questions for us.
Yeah.
So he said that the advantage is a compliance entity and regulations. Yeah. Okay. So, we're more than happy to answer questions. The whole point is to answer questions. And if we don't know the questions right away, I'm sure we can, answer them another day. Are you guys comfortable with, sharing our Twitter handles? Or
yeah, sure.
Okay, so what is your Twitter handle?
Here, I'll type it in the chat.
Okay, and then Pedro, what's yours?
I typed it in the chat as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm really happy that we had a lot of people come in and that are, in the blockchain community, and I'm excited to have like a second session. Robert Lorado, cool. Okay, oh, that's you, Oliver Rodriguez. I thought that was someone else because it says Rod Wilguez. I was like, who's telling everyone his? Oh, okay. I was wondering. I was like, why is someone telling Oliver? I'm like, they know him really well. I thought it was someone else typing your Twitter handle.
Yeah, I should probably make another one.
No, it's fine. Mine's Helen says. Okay, so you know, we always want to have respectful communication, and I'm happy that we had a lot of people ask questions and clearly know a lot about blockchain. And thank you for you know, sparking this dialogue. And Oliver, are you open to doing a second session, and Pedro and like a deep dive?
Yeah, possibly.
So I'm thinking that we could do, you know, 2 more, but you know, we all have some crazy upcoming schedules. So I will try to have a second 1-hour session where we could walk through, you know, building Hyperledger blockchain from not from scratch, because that would take 12 hours, but step by step. And then also, you know, maybe somewhere down the line we could have like a more open-ended, like just a Q&A session. I think there's a lot of dialogue on private versus public. That's a very big topic, even that we see with clients. And, you know, we might not have all the answers, but yeah, open to hosting a session like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So, oh, did we share the call for the website? Let me, I'm going to share. Okay. I just wanted to share really quickly. Okay. Let me just go to the page first. Call for code. So I was talking in the beginning about the whole theme of health and community health, and I just thought of all the hurricanes in the past and some of the flooding and the types of waterborne illnesses. And so there's a page that I wanted to share. The call for code page has so many different links. It's a little bit confusing. You guys should apply, because the last year's call for code challenge, Project Owl, made its way into Bloomberg News on the front page like 2 days ago, which was pretty cool. So here's the website, and then there's, okay, let me just share my page. I'm just gonna share Google Chrome. So this is the main website, Call for Code Challenge. If your team wins, or if you win, the expectation is by July 29th, you submit not just your idea, but your actual code. So this, the expectation is that you have your MVP, minimum viable product, and that, you know, it's on theme with Call for Code and community. Here it is, cover the health and well-being theme. So if you go to the website, I mean, this is a really great way as a developer, if you're interested in, sometimes like, you know, you have side projects, but then you don't really have a goal of building it for a particular, you know, use case. And so this is, you know, something that is philanthropic. And if you actually win, the first prize is $200,000, right? So here's the page that I was referring to. So when I came to this page, it made me really think about different ideas on the topic of health and well-being. So here you can see challenges facing healthcare workers in natural disasters. So Pedro, you mentioned how the backup generators were failing, and then accessing medical records after a natural disaster. So I think typically, like, I'm actually Canadian, so I'm from Toronto. I'm in the US right now, but basically, you know, I think that there are obviously other countries where medical records may still be paper copies, and that's not something that I really thought about. But if you're treating someone, let's say they need access to, you know, immediately they need like a blood transfusion, right? Or they need extra blood after surgery. You don't even know what blood type they are. So this is a major problem, or you don't know with the donations of blood and keeping track of the types of blood, as well as which blood is adequate for donation and clean. And so keeping patient networks connected after natural disasters, just kind of like Project OWL, which won last year. So healthcare tech wish list for post-disaster response and recovery. We have some videos, so this can help you think about different ideas. And then chatbot aids in supplying food when natural disaster strikes. Okay. Yeah, and that was a problem, I think, Pedro, you had mentioned in Puerto Rico, where they had all these food donations, and that clip of the water bottles that were not distributed ever, and people ended up paying for water. And there in Puerto Rico, there was this massive, mountain of water bottles. So yeah, I could not believe that photo. Not sure if you guys caught it, but anyways, here is the page that I thought was actually pretty interesting in terms of like, when you say health and community health and wellness in the context of building applications for disaster recovery. Like I just didn't have a ton of ideas. But yeah, this is incredible, this one page for me. Okay, I think I'm good. I talk a lot, so I could be talking for like another 5 hours here. So I'm done talking. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for joining, and everyone has my Twitter handle.
Yeah, hope you all found it useful. If you have any more questions, just send them to me on Twitter and I'll try to answer them.
Yeah, and remember that the deadline for call for code is July 29th.
July 29th, yep. Awesome. All right, thank you guys. You guys are awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for the excellent comments and questions.
Yeah, thanks.
Session.